Christians all over the world in every denomination have questions about the Bible, questions their theological frameworks have trouble answering. Like, how could God disavow his covenant people, Israel? Why did he give a law that he said was perfect and then say, well, no one has to keep it anymore? Well, our guest today, Chad Oltman, is an evangelical pastor turned chaplain who has undertaken the journey from church to Messianic synagogue. And he's here to tell us what changed in his theology and worldview and how the Jewish idea of Tikkun Olam, or repair of the world, inspired him to start a new chapter of pastoral care, helping addicts recover. You're listening to Messiah Podcast, where Jesus is Jewish, and that changes everything. Messiah Podcast is a production of First Fruits of Zion. Create a free account at ffoz.org to start exploring the Jewish foundation of your faith and receive a free book from our store.
Let me introduce you to my teacher, the rabbi from the Galilee.
All right, all the way from Minneapolis, Minnesota, it's Chad Oltman. How you doing, Chad?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank God. Now, we are privileged to host all sorts of people here on the podcast. Sometimes we have our own people on. Sometimes we have people who are somewhat public figures. And sometimes we have people who we just think are fantastically interesting and we want to platform. And you fall in, I believe, into this third category. And I want to tell people, like right here at the top, why we like you so much and why we wanted to have you on the podcast. So our tagline here is Jesus is Jewish and that changes everything. And you're an evangelical pastor who has discovered this. So you're like a church leader, you're a church planter, you understand Christian theology. So you're not coming from a place of naivety or ignorance as you approach theology, as you approach ecclesiology, as you approach the ideas one encounters when one sort of delves into Messianic Judaism. And you have found all this to be helpful, and it's changed things for you. So I can sit up here and say, I have a seminary degree from Liberty University. I've led churches, I've planted churches, but I could just say, you know, I have a vested interest, right? Because it's like I'm the host. But to have another person who has been on the same journey come on, we could talk shop a little bit and help leaders and pastors out there understand that this is a transformative method and that it's helpful and it changes things in a positive way. And second, I guess to explain just really the scope of what can change when you engage with this, I guess, this sort of disruptive message of Messianic Judaism.
Yeah, it's certainly been disruptive, that's for sure. And I would say in a good way, you know, a very good way. I personally love it. I wish more people would have loved it along with me. And, you know, when I think about that, I think, well, the story's not over. There's a lot, you know, it takes a long time for people to process ideas. And when disruptive thoughts come in, you know, we live in a crazy world. It's very difficult. There's a lot of turmoil all over, especially in Minneapolis. We've been in the news plenty. And so, gosh, you know, you take a disruptive world and then or a world that's just in chaos, and then you really want to disrupt someone's theology. Gosh, there has to be a level of compassion in that process. And, you know, what started for me back in 2005 has maybe just begun for others, you know, just in me presenting different things. So yeah, it's a fascinating journey. I'm glad to be on it, and it's full of twists and turns. That's for sure.
Yeah. The chaos. I have a sneaking feeling that the chaos was there all along, but now we're noticing.
Right.
But that's another conversation. So, I want to start at sort of at the beginning. Where did you come from? Like, who are you?
Yeah. So, you know, I'm pretty average person, I would say, but that doesn't mind disruption. I think I kind of long for it. I think I long for understanding things the best that I can. I think I'm a very curious person. And I think my curiosity led me to ask questions along the way in my faith journey that's been going on for about 32 years. And I had a really disruption in 2005, where I began looking at there's just this lack of continuity inside of the things that I was believing, to where I'm like, hey, I don't see how this thread is actually working anymore. And I'm saying things that I don't actually think. And so then, I'm like, well, I have two options: just kind of double down on what I've already been taught and what I've been living into, or I allow the disruption to do what it's going to do and move forward in that. And I chose option B and continue following that path. So, I guess I still am a pastor. There's plenty of people that call me that, but I stepped out of pastoring in 2022. And now I'm currently a chaplain, which I think we'll talk about later, at an organization called Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge. So plenty of experience pastoring. And yes, I've been a part of a couple different church plants and was, on the ground floor of all those things. The church that I was pastoring is still going. They threw me a party when I left, hopefully not because I was leaving, but, nevertheless, it wasn't, we hear too often that, when there's a split of some sort or somebody walks away, it's based on some moral failure or whatever.
Yeah. You just had to go in a new direction.
Yeah.
Tell me about this thing of the biblical continuity. What are some of the red flags you saw, or some of the signs, that specific signs of Bible verses, or what just wasn't coming together for you?
Well, I remember somebody saying one time, they said, they're like, oh, I'm so glad we don't have to follow those crazy laws found in the Torah. And that really struck me as just odd. And I was like, well, I maybe don't understand them, but they're certainly not crazy, that they're not, they're God inspired. And so how could they be crazy? And then I began looking at, Psalm 19, the law of the Lord is perfect. Psalm 119, 142, the Torah is true. And so I wasn't able to understand, well, I have all these passages actually saying that this thing that people are calling crazy is actually God inspired, so it can't be crazy. And that actually felt kind of like blasphemy to have someone say that. I'm like, how can that be? That can't be. And so it just, again, made me super curious. And then I began thinking well, this thing that people are calling crazy has sustained a people for thousands of years. So something's amiss here. And I began doing a bunch of different research and just starting to try to understand, okay, if that's true, then I don't even know if this whole Bible is true. Because if this is not true, then how can this be true? And if I have to question this, it felt like it was a house of cards. And I had to have it be on a foundation that I'm like, no, this is what it is, regardless of how I feel about it, which on just a total random thing. I think that just inside of just faith in general, I think we have too much value in our own opinions. We think well, this is what I think, therefore it must be true. And I think that that's one of the main problems inside of just the faith discussion. It's well, actually, your opinion matters very little in one sense. It doesn't mean that you can't contribute to the understanding of what it is to follow God, but it's been set in place for a long time. So you have to take it as what it is, not what you want it to be, or not maybe how your worldview has shaped it. It's it is what it is, and our job is to conform to it, not for it to conform to us. And back in 2005, when I was kind of going through this crisis of faith, I was like, I have to figure this out. I have to put this in its proper context so that when I'm actually teaching it, I'm teaching the right thing. Because, we all read in James, not many of you should be teachers, because you're going to be judged more strictly. So I felt that. I'm not one that I was like, oh, that's just a nice passage. I really felt the gravity of that, where I'm like, I have to get this right no matter what it ends up costing. And so I believe I'm on that journey now and doing that. And I've been on that journey since 2005, and FFOZ has played a major part in the assisting of that process.
Oh, I'm glad. Yeah, 2005 sounds like maybe the same year I started thinking about this stuff really seriously. So that's interesting. Is that right? Was that the year? Yeah. I was living on Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. Met a guy with a Star of David necklace, and I was like a dispensationalist. I'm like, cool, And then, but he found out that he only ate like kosher food, and I'm like, what are you doing, buddy? Like that was then. This is now. And he had just a couple of things to say, and I was like, all right. Like I didn't have any response. It's because he was just like, he was so calm and gracious, but he was very confident, and his Bible verses looked better than mine. So I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, right.
But, it's, I come back to these verses in the Torah where Moses says, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, you have to do this forever throughout all your generations and all your dwelling places. And then, so when you get to the New Testament and people are saying, oh, you have to reinterpret that in light of Jesus, like that's really hard to reinterpret.
Yes, exactly. The forever, just what you're saying, those forever passages, I'm like, well, forever means forever, right? The answers that I would get from people were just so fascinating. And I went on this really, unique journey in all of this. This just came to mind. Like there was a time that as a pastor, I was trying to figure all this stuff out, but I didn't want to do it. Like there was kind of like I was building the car while I was driving it, which like I'm pastoring, I'm doing all these teachings, but I'm having all these revelations. So I decided to like look for people with their doctorates to begin having these discussions. So I'd like find pastors, and I'd like, send them an email and say, hey, would you be willing to meet with me to have some just different discussions? I wouldn't tell them I was a pastor because I really wanted to just kind of leave that in the background. And I had those like, the forever commands and all these different things. And I remember this one guy was like, yeah, I'll give you an hour. And then, we can talk for an hour. And we ended up being there for like 4 hours, and all of his answers kept being so unsatisfying to me. And I remember like, well, you got your doctorate in this stuff, and it still doesn't make sense to me. And so then I'm like, okay, well, I think that I just have to look in other areas. And I mean, there was things that were happening before that. For example, in 2006, I went to Israel for the first time because I was like, okay, I need to go right back to the beginning of all of this. Like, I need to go to the land. If the land is important, I should know the land. If the culture is important, I should know the culture. And to me, that just makes sense. That there's nothing really that debatable to me about that. And it just made a lot of sense. So I was able to go to, the land, and, that was my first time. And then for a number of different reasons, I was able to go back another 6 times. And so I really got super familiar with all the biblical sites, and I started really thinking about the culture of Israel and the culture of the Jewish people and all of that. And then something really profound happened. I got introduced to a man named Dr. Dwight Pryor. And interestingly, he has this like kind of history with FFOZ that they intermingle quite well. And, he was this guy that he had arthritis all through his body. And I just found that to be like kind of this really cool combination of like, here's this brilliant mind in a weak body. I'm like, oh, there must be something good here. Like, you really want to go after this. It seemed like the perfect combination. And so I began listening. I mean, I don't even know how many messages I've listened to of him. He's since gone to be with the Lord, and may his name be of blessed memory. But I just listened to so many. And then I was given the opportunity to go to something that he had called Havrim. And so that was like, he gathered all these people together, and he just taught for, like 9 hours. And I just, I'm a Bible nerd. I love this stuff. And so it was not like a burden in any way to have 9 hours of teaching from someone that was really bringing a level of clarity to things that I had not seen, or I didn't have anyone to talk to about. It was like there was continuity of these two different ideas. So he was just such a major, major influence in my spiritual journey.
Wow. So you're pastoring at this time?
Yeah.
And so you're sort of on the job training. What did you do? Like for me, when I got to the point where, because my first the first thing I saw of this that really bothered me was the food thing. I was like, wow,
yeah,
God said don't eat pork, and God doesn't change. As far as I know, the pigs haven't changed. So like, if nothing else, like if it's good enough for the Israelites in the Old Testament times, it's good enough for me. There's got to be a reason for it. And so without really having any more knowledge than that, I was like, I just stopped having pork. I didn't really like it much anyway, and I never had oysters or lobster, and I never liked any of that stuff. So it wasn't like a huge deal for me to do that, but it really upsets people sometimes when you do that. What did you take some steps in your personal life, or did you take some steps in your teaching? Did you start telling people, like Joel Osteen, a pig will even eat its own dead child? The ushers have locked the doors.
Yeah, I did. I think that I was like, gosh, the law of the Lord is perfect. Why wouldn't I want to follow something that is deemed as perfect? And so I became a one law person that, like I said before, I'm building the car while I'm driving it. So I didn't really know what I was doing. And I mean, it's important to say, to me at least, that I didn't have anyone helping me. This is just me living in Minnesota trying to figure this stuff out. I did in 2009, interestingly, I did end up buying an FFOZ, Shadows of the Messiah. I have the big binder, that could stop a bullet kind of thing. Like this thing was just huge. And I was going through that. That was super helpful at that time. But yeah, I was one law with, I tried to have compassion. So again, trying to figure out how does someone actually hear this? And so I could say, everyone stop eating pork, right? But I'm like, okay, well, I don't think that's going to go over well for whatever reason. And I've never really understood this, this whole pork thing. It's like even mentioning that has this really weird reaction that I just don't even understand. It's just food. I mean, it's not even that big of a deal to me. And what I found though, that as I was in that process, that was super helpful. It made me really aware on just things that I consume, and I really kind of looked at it from that lens, not necessarily an obedience thing at that time. I was just well, what could I learn from this? And what I learned is what I consume, there are things inside, and you actually have to pay attention in life, and you have to think about the things that you're doing. And so I found that to be really, really helpful. Again, nobody when I was pastoring was really embracing that. There's a number of reasons why. We had a little bit of kind of dual visions going on for a while. I had a co-pastor who was really feels very compelled to enter into the racial discussion that has been, for so long. Well, we had been doing that racial discussion that's now everywhere since 2003. And so we kind of had that priority. And then I had this other thing going on. And then, if you can appreciate, our church was on 55th in Chicago, and George Floyd died on 38th in Chicago. So, we're right in the thick of all of that. There was so many discussions and what that means. We had, for example, in our church, you would see do justice, love mercy, walk humbly. Well, the idea of justice in the way that I would see justice had a very particular thing. I would say the way that I was translating it was do righteousness, do right things, And the way that the church maybe was seeing it was much more in a social justice mode. And so you kind of have these conflicting kind of viewpoints on this text. And so as I'm going through this process, I'm also trying to understand, like, well, here's what we've said as a church that is a priority. And I want to honor that in a way that is helpful. And it was confusing. It was really challenging, very difficult.
Yeah, it's hard to think of something that is more disappointing to me than Christians joining another club also.
Yeah.
Like, I'm a follower of Jesus, but I'm also, here's all my other priorities and my political views. It's like, all right, dude, good luck. And I mean that for all of them, even the ones that I agree with. I think that about, because it's like, we know the truth is in the Bible. Everything else to me is suspect.
And what happens in that is, like, what I experienced in pastoring was, you just have all these sub agendas, and that's just congregations, that can be Messianic faith too. I mean, that's not just exclusive to just Christendom. There are these agendas that you have to deal with that are passions, and maybe it's, somebody's gifting, that's God's calling, but they want to maybe take a calling and make it like a bigger thing. And somewhere along the way, that can just become inappropriate. It becomes this thing that you're like, no, that's actually not what the text is telling us to do. But, they maybe take a verse or something a bit out of context and they, double down on it. And they're like, no, it is telling us to do that. And so now then it gets into like, well, who's right? And I'm like, well, I may not be totally right, but I know that's not right. And, and then it just becomes, it just is what it is to be a part of a body. You just get these different passions.
Yeah. Well, and then you have to avoid the temptation of thinking, wow, it stinks to be surrounded by wrong people. Good thing my theology is the only biblical one. It's like there's always this tension. Like, am I going down a road that's just as silly as the one they're going down? And it's like, wow, it really takes, especially if you're watching the news or reading anything, it's like it takes so much effort to remain centered on like a biblical worldview. To me, it means saying, I guess I'm not sure about that, to a lot of things that are like other people's ideas. It's like, okay, I could find a Bible verse for that. I could probably find one against it. How does God feel? Until we have a prophet, I think we're all going to be surprised when Jesus comes back and tells us what we're wrong about. But anyway, hey, if you're enjoying this conversation, take a moment to like, comment, subscribe, or share with a friend. It really helps us reach more people with the message of the Jewish Jesus and his coming kingdom. You can find more Messianic Jewish teaching and resources from First Fruits of Zion when you visit ffoz.org and create a free account. Thanks. Yeah, I started out one law also, just trying to do everything. And then, and it was a trying to do Torah stuff without having any information from Judaism or Jewish sources.
Right.
And then it was like, well, no, the Jewish sources are important. So then it looked a lot like just a Gentile trying to do Judaism. And then it was this like distinction theology that became clear, when First Fruits of Zion turned the corner and was like, actually it is clear in the Bible that Jews are strictly held to the terms of the Sinai covenant, right. And Gentiles, the apostles were gentler with Gentiles. They didn't make us do all of that. And that just tease everyone off. Let me tell you, nobody likes that.
Well, and that's an interesting part of the story for me too, because, I'm this one law, like this major disruption comes into my life, or I'm trying to figure out what that means. And then, I read Daniel Lancaster's book on Galatians, and I remember reading this book on my parents' pontoon. And the next thing I know, I'm like throwing the book across the pontoon because I'm like, oh man, like here's another disruption that I have to actually figure out. And what I thought I had now is clarity, which for both my wife and I, we were super touched. I'm sure it was a very disruptive time for FFOZ, But we were actually really touched that they allowed themselves to be disrupted. We thought that that was like such a like positive thing. Like they're like, you guys looked at what you're doing and you said, no, we think we have something wrong here. And we actually have to bring this clarity, no matter the cost. And so I kind of had this dual thing. Like on one hand, I'm like frustrated that I have to kind of go back to the drawing board, start over, kind of relook at it again. On the other hand, I felt like, well, I'm really encouraged. I'm doing this with a group of people that have gone through the process that I'm going through. And so that kind of then led to this like, well, gosh, let's start going down these roads. Then I found out that Beth Emanuel is, in beautiful, historic Hudson, Wisconsin, and I'm only 30 minutes away from there. And so we decided to go there. And, if you've never been to a Messianic synagogue, I mean, it's like an eye opener. It's like, it's different in every way except that they give a message. Of course, Christian church is praying too, but, this is praying with the Siddur. And so we entered into that world. And I feel super blessed. I mean, these guys are so cool. Not just, Daniel and Aaron, but all the people going there, they're all brilliant, So now now where I'm like all alone, all of a sudden I've got these people that I'm like, oh my goodness, these guys are rock stars as far as, the biblical narrative and how this all works. And they were all so unbelievably helpful to me. Like, it's just been absolutely incredible. But again, disruption, I think, is something that a believer has to embrace. And if they're not willing to embrace it, I think that that's where a lot of these problems lie, is the unwillingness to be disrupted.
Yeah. I used to listen to a Bible teacher who would constantly say the only sure barrier to encountering the truth is the presumption that you already have it. Yeah. And I found this to be the case. I don't know if everyone is like this. I was raised with the Abeka homeschool curriculum, so this is independent fundamental Baptists, and I don't know if all of the denominations are like this. I don't know them from the inside, like I know that particular era of IFB. But I got very much the impression that the basis on which you were saved or not was kind of whether you had the right theology. Yeah. So if you go in there and start tweaking things, you're now going like you should be afraid that you're going to go to hell when you die, especially if you're thinking of different like theories of the atonement, or like you start poking around any of those places. And it's like, oh no, that's now Jesus isn't going to save you now. It doesn't matter like that you believe in him. You've deviated from the true path, and now you're gone. You're a goner. And so, having been raised with that, it was to some degree, it's an overused word, and it's probably not the right word, but it was kind of traumatic to have to go in and do like open heart surgery on some of this stuff. It's like, is this okay? Is this safe?
Yeah, and my experience with that is very similar. And I had this kind of weird reaction to it because I call it theology idolatry. And so now it's like you're worshiping your theology in such a way that it's like it has all these like massive implications that you're like, okay, is that actually true? And should I be doing this? And so to let go of some of that theology, or at least have an open hand with it. I mean, maybe you don't even let it go. It just feels like there's this grip on it that if you let go, you're going to like just float off into Neverland kind of thing. And it's like, that's just not true. That like, I kind of I don't want to use too strong of language. 'Cause again, I want to reiterate that I really have compassion for people. It's like they're holding on to that thing often because the world is just so chaotic, and people want security and they want to actually hold on to things, and it can feel cruel to pry that out of their hand, or at least try to. I'm not saying it shouldn't be done. I'm just, you try to find the balance of like being gracious in someone's process and my own desire to have other people doing the same thing that I think is cool and understanding. So that theology idolatry, I think it fits in that you have to stop worshiping it. Like you have to stop. And I think there's a freedom in it. I really do. But it is scary, and it does kind of put you in these unknown places, and it certainly makes future conversations at times very awkward.
I think it's important, like you said, though, to recognize the human. I think there's a lot of, and I was like this. I was like this for years and years and years. It was like, oh, I found the truth, and now it's my job to fashion that truth into a weapon of rhetorical violence, with which to bludgeon everyone I meet. And it just didn't go well. So like as a pastor, do you have a short little snippet of advice for everyone? I'm sure people are listening to this. There's people who are listening to this who say, my kids think I'm nuts, or my parents think I'm nuts, or my husband thinks I'm nuts, or like family, like I can't, my church got kicked out of my church or whatever. Like, what are the rules of the road here for someone who's like, well, I want to tell people what I believe, but I want to do it in a compassionate way?
Yeah. My first thought is, I think this was in like 7 Habits of Highly Effective People or something like that. But you have important but not urgent, important, or maybe I said that wrong. But like, I think a lot of these things, Hashem is just fine, like everything's fine. And we think like this is urgent, and it's probably not urgent. It's certainly important. So to take the urgency down and have a longer view of all this, where I think if I would look at some of the mistakes that I made, I felt like it was urgent, important. And so I began doing things in this urgent type of way that I'm like, no, this really wasn't, in fact, it probably had a real negative response. Because, I probably put people on the defensive. And it doesn't mean that I was necessarily wrong. It just means that in how I went about it probably wasn't done with a great deal of wisdom. And I think that if you can move into the important but not urgent, it's still important. You still pursue it. You make it, your life goal, and you begin kind of like pushing this in thousands of little ways, which I think maybe we're just impatient. I don't know. But maybe we're just like people that are like, I want it and I want it now, instead of, well, let's build a foundation. Let's do this in a way that can be digested. It's a slow rain, not a downpour. And I think that when I go back in my experience, I think I, added a fire hose when really people needed a drinking fountain. And, there was just more water on the floor than anything else. I don't think that people were really taking it in. So to the person that's like, hey, I'm discovering this, how should I go forward? My advice would be like, find a group of people that are doing that, join a Torah club, enter in those discussions, pray that opportunities would come in a way that, you could share your thoughts in a way that people could digest them. And they're not just going to automatically go on a defensive. They're going to like take that information in, and then they're going to like think about it, and they're going to have to like wrestle with it. So I think this is where the difference between like persuasion, like I'm trying to really trying to get you to get on my side, versus influence. I think of, for example, the Shabbat table. I think like, wow, if everyone could just experience what Shabbat is, I'm like, and just the beauty of it. I have some good friends that continually invite us over, and there's just this beauty that happens in the discussion and the conversation, and just how the whole time is like centered around, stopping and just really focusing in on God. I'm like, oh, this could change the world. And this is really like, it's that invitation model of like, well, come experience this. And then like, let's get out of the theological weeds, which I think I've just never really seen a lot of fruit out of it. I've just never seen something where I'm like, yeah, that was helpful. Like it usually has the exact opposite effect. So. Yeah. I think recently I said in a React video, it's easy to
to dunk your head into the pool of theology and take a deep breath.
Yeah.
Because so much of theology, I'm not going to rant a whole lot about this. There's a lot of theology out there that is just a really complicated workaround of like a really clear Bible verse.
Yeah, right. That's really good. Yeah.
We thought about this for 1,000 years and we figured out why we don't have to do this anymore. It's like, oh, that's very clever, but it's what you do. You've departed from the text. That's what I'd always come back to. It's like the text no longer makes sense to the original author or audience. You have made the text nonsensical, and that just never works for me. It never works for me. It can have other meanings. It can have secret meanings. It can have prophetic meanings, but not if that erases the original, like obvious meaning of the text in its original culture.
I've been telling people lately, I'm like, okay, let's say that the kingdom of God is a soup and Jesus is the taster. And he's going to like, what are the ingredients that you need so that when he tastes that soup, it tastes the way that the kingdom is supposed to taste. And like, I think what happens is people get used to the taste of the soup that they've made. And so they're like, they don't want to really like go any further than that. They just really want to be like, no, this is how it tastes and Jesus will grow to like it, And it's like, I think that's really, you want to divert from that. You're like, no, he's the master chef. He knows what it tastes like. It's our job to study and know so that when he tastes it, he's like, yes, it tastes like that. And of course, you do too much salt or you do too much whatever. And it's like, there's always adjustments that have to happen. But I really think that we kind of get into this mode of like, well, it tastes good to me. I'm sure it will taste good to Jesus. And I just think that is a faulty way of seeing it. I think like you really want the opposite. Like, no, he's the master chef.
Yeah. And that's what happens sometimes, not to everyone.
Yep.
But people who fill all of their time with theology, it's possible to, in the process, minimize the actual person of Jesus with all his agency and his lordship.
Right.
And it's not, you can have both. You can have Jesus in theology, but it's possible to go off kilter in one's emphasis.
Yeah.
It's one of the things that I first discovered about Judaism that I thought was really interesting, which is that you don't find the same kind of theology, right? There's thousands and thousands of Christian systematic theology textbooks.
Yeah.
And there's not that many Jewish systematic theology textbooks. The reason is that they engage with the text for different reasons.
Right.
And it's fascinating to see the fruit of that. And it changes everything. So you stopped pastoring and you started doing something else. Was this a result of just where your theology was going, or did you just have your call, the guy you felt the call to do a different thing with your life? What happened?
Yeah, so our church went through a major transition. There was an event that happened in 2018 that kind of like, it was one of those things that blew everything up, and then you kind of have to think like, okay, we have to put these pieces back together. And as those pieces went back together, it was clear that, and it was very difficult. I mean, it was super costly, especially from a financial standpoint, but because the church itself was actually doing really, really well. When we went through this transition and there was a decision that we used to have this plurality of leadership where kind of like everyone had a seat at the table and everyone's opinion mattered, which it would still matter. Well, I'll just say that they decided they wanted a lead pastor model. And interestingly, Jason Meyer, who had replaced John Piper, became a candidate. And he ended up becoming the pastor of the Urban Refuge, and they went with that route. And when I looked at the landscape, I was like, well, the things that I feel called to really don't align to this lead pastor model. And so all I could see looking out into the future is like being divisive. And I just really was like, no, that's not what this is about. And I felt God like, well, there was a particular moment where he was like, listen, you need to lay this down. And I'm like, no way am I laying this down. And he's like, well, either you lay it down or it gets ripped out of your hands. So you get to decide this thing. And so I did it. I'm really grateful that I did, but it was extremely hard. And I left pastoring and then I went to go work at FedEx because I really wanted just clarity for a while. And FedEx was super clear, like take a box. They gave me a severance. And so that was helpful, but take a box, deliver a box. And that's kind of what I did for about 8 months. But I had applied for a position at a organization called Minnesota Adult Teen Challenge, which is a treatment program for people suffering from addiction to like meth and fentanyl, alcohol, of course. And so there was a chaplain position available that I applied for. I didn't get right in the beginning, but then I got later. And that's what I've been doing the last 3 years is really, I got like right now I have, 20 some guys, maybe 25, 28 guys right now. And I'm just walking with them, interacting with them on how God could come into their life and help give them a sense of purpose on moving away from this addiction. And so I teach classes and, I'm around a bunch of phenomenal people that, that they're all, I would say that I'm a Messianic believer now, and I've left Christianity. And yet I'm not one that's left Christianity in the sense of bitterness. I'm like, no, these people are amazing. These people are really trying to change the world. They're trying to help people. And so I'm not, some people get really bitter about this whole thing. I don't particularly get bitter. Anyways, it doesn't mean it's not confusing at times. So I teach classes and, interestingly, I'm able to incorporate a lot of these things in to the teachings that I do in front of these guys. And one of them would, like, just as an example, would be like the issue of idolatry in the Bible is that, whether you're Messianic or Christian, everybody's like, yeah, idolatry is a major issue, And so I use that lens when thinking about something like meth. And I'll be like, well, really what this is an idol. You sacrifice for it. It costs you your family and your friends and all these different things. And so I try to put it underneath that lens of idolatry. And then the second thing that I do is I take and I throw up just like the kingdom narrative that we've been doing through the end of days. And I'm like, well, if there's a king and that king has a rule and that king has instructions, you have to decide what you're going to be instructed by. And so somebody that's coming out of meth addiction, particularly meth addiction, they're not so, they're not concerned about distinction theology. That's just not where they're at. And, and I think it's gracious to be like, even though I have this passion to be like, okay, this is where this person is at, and I want to meet them where they're at, and then trust Hashem to, like all this stuff can be figured out at another time. And that kind of goes back to that urgent, but not important, or important, not urgent. It's like, it's all important, but I'm like, well, at this point, it's not urgent. It's like, they're just trying to understand, okay, I've got this major thing in my life. How do I deal with that? And, you learn a ton from people. I've now had hundreds and hundreds of guys with these types of discussions. And, it's hard to explain, you have to experience it, but, just talking all day long. I mean, yesterday I had 4 clients, and we call them clients, and, just talking about things of faith and talking about like, why are we attracted to this particular thing? Why are we willing to pay so much in order to have it? And so it's been a phenomenal job. It's very difficult. You hear the most tragic stories. And unfortunately, I've had 4 different people that have passed away because they went back to it, and it's, they've died. So it's a fascinating journey that I'm on, because I go from that to a very Christian worldview, because that's just what they're doing. And, there's a lot of beauty there, to Beth Emmanuel, which is a Messianic synagogue. And so you got this like pendulum swing that I do weekly And I like to believe that I've kind of become bilingual in faith. Like I'm able to kind of be in both worlds. And, personally, I think we're going to have to, I think FFOZ does this really, really well of learning how to understand both worlds and being able to speak in that way so that there's a focus on things that I go, gosh, this is what, if we could get to that point, I think that the conversations in the future will only get better.
Yeah. It's interesting that you described yourself as having left Christianity. It reminds me of like on the Mayflower, we had Puritans and separatists, right? You had people who were like, all right, we're going to take the Church of England by the horns and we're going to turn it back into what it should have been. And you had people who were like, no, we're out. We're going to do something different. And you see that all throughout the people who are like in the orbit of Messianic Judaism. Some of them are like, I don't want to have anything to do with the organized church anymore. I'm going to go to a synagogue or a Torah club, or I'm just going to stay at home and watch, Shalom Macon on Saturdays or whatever. Right. And then you have people like me who are just like, I like church. I like going to church. I like the pastor, like I know him. It's a small church. I'm helpful there. Like I help with the music. And I think that the church can be a great force for good. And that the people there are hungry and they want to know the Bible. And so it's like, it's fascinating, the spectrum of reactions that people have. And, I wouldn't tell someone that they would have to do one or the other. I just think it's interesting.
I want to be clear that I don't see like Christianity as a bad thing. For me personally, I needed some definition because as much disruption that has happened in my world, I feel like I needed something to say like, okay, what am I now? And what am I joining forces with and trying to advance? And it's not necessarily wanting to criticize anything that the church is doing, though I think on maybe both sides, whether Messianic or Christianity, there's definitely things that you can criticize. But for me personally, I just needed the definition. Like I just needed the clarity because it was just too confusing. I had to be like, okay, this is what I think. And I can think these things while holding on a very positive, like the church was a massive good force in my life, period. Like I don't look and think, oh, this was a force for bad. I'm like, no, absolutely not. This was an amazing force. I'm so grateful to the people. And I would never, ever want to come across as someone that was like, oh, this was all from evil or something. Like, no, I think God has used it in profound ways. And I think we're moving towards this potential revelation as we go forward with where we're at. That I think that the conversation is going to change. And I want the relationships in Christianity to be healthy to where those can happen in a really positive way.
Yeah, well, everyone's talking about Israel more and more. So
yeah, right.
There's conversations. Right. There's conversations happening. Some of them are a little scary.
Right.
So you're doing this. You're doing this objectively good work of helping addicts. And this is like, to me, it's a very Jewish idea. Like to say, well, what's something good I can go do? Mm-hmm. Has like your encounter with a Messianic Jewish framework, has that informed the work that you do there? Or is it just like, no, it's no different than if they would have brought in a vanilla flavor evangelical Christian pastor to do this?
Probably the latter. I mean, I think that, I have something personally, and then the organization of Minnesota Adult and Teen Challenge has, their agendas of the way that they do things. I would say for me personally, yeah, no, completely, because I want to repair the world. I want to be a part of that, and I want to be doing what I can. I don't feel like it's my responsibility to repair all of the world, but what's in front of me, I want to repair. And I want to have my life and my family's life be a life that's like, well, we're willing to engage if this is helpful. I mean, even this podcast, I think like the prayer that I had with it was, well, I want it to be helpful. I want it to be something that it's repairing, it's helpful. And I think that that's an extremely Jewish thought. as far as repairing the world.
Yeah. There's so much talk out there. And I get tasked with reacting to some of it. And I'm developing this impression that a lot of Christians have a low view of the idea of redemption.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, well, Jesus is coming back, so it doesn't matter if all the forests burn down and all the whales die or whatever. It's just like, he'll fix it later. Like, or whether it's like, oh, God just got rid of the Jewish people. They're gone. They're not the chosen people anymore forever. Because God just wiped the slate clean, got someone else, and the law is wiped clean. Everything's just like, oh, a new thing. Just get rid of the old thing. Here's the new thing. It's like, that's not really the idea of redemption. The idea of redemption is that you have what you have. It becomes what it should have been. Like, it gets repaired, it gets restored. So yeah, it's like with addicts, like, well, helping someone overcome addiction, it's a redemptive idea, rather than saying, oh, go to prison or whatever. Like, it's, well, what if we can make a person whole again? What if they can be redeemed from this? What if they can find a constructive approach to life? What if they can be brought back into the service of their Creator and their fellow man? Like, these are hopeful and redemptive ideas that I feel they're perhaps being shouted down sometimes by other ideas made of iron and steel. I don't know.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I mean, like, there are people that have done, that's bad things. You don't want those things. And there's a million reasons why those things happen. And, the stories, again, are just absolutely tragic, and it's terrible. So you start thinking like, well, this person could go to prison, or we could potentially have the opportunity to really, have this redemptive process go through. And, and then you start thinking about like, well, I work primarily with men. I mean, I do teach a women's program thing too, but you start thinking like, well, if all these guys go back and be good dads, like, oh my goodness, like, what could happen with that? Whereas, oh, you send them to prison, now you have this child without a dad. And if they could catch that vision where they're like, no, I don't just want to be just a dad. I want to be a great dad. I want to have my worldview transformed by the power of the kingdom. I only see that as a net positive, like, that's a good thing. That doesn't excuse the behavior, because believe me, there's plenty of just horrendous behavior, but like, I just don't see the solution. Like, I go, well, they go into the prison system. They go into a cycle, and when you're living in it, you just see it. It's like, no, that's really real. It just keeps happening. So something has to interrupt that. And it's not perfect. And there are plenty of people that abuse what Teen Challenge does for them. However, there are thousands and thousands that have really caught on to this message and allowed themselves to be dictated by the kingdom and the words of Jesus. Like, that's profound. That's amazing. That's good. And that betters my life just because they're out there doing those things. So I do think there's a redemptive act, a work in that.
Yeah. And that's, it's one of those things that I didn't really notice until I started reading Jewish literature and learned about this idea of Tikkun Olam, of repairing the world.
Yes.
And it all started to click for me. And then looking at what Jesus actually did and said, and what John the Baptist said.
Right.
Like, he had some ideas of what was wrong with society. People came out to be baptized, and he started yelling at them. But after the podcast, dear listener, go read what he said. You can see God's heart for real human beings and their real human plights. We can make a difference. We can change things. We can change people's lives. Like, ultimately, it's God who's doing that, but God can use us to help people and change situations and perform these redemptive acts in the world. And this is what the prophets and John and Jesus and the apostles called us to do. And I think it's important to take it seriously, not get depressed about the state of the world or lash out, but to be hopeful and to work constructively. And I don't know, I could go on and on about this, but yeah, it's a Jewish, it's just more of a Jewish perspective than the one I grew up with.
Yeah. Well, especially the idea of if everything's just about getting people into the boat, so they're in the boat in heaven, I think that there's a loss of discipleship. There's all these things in the action of trying to repair the world that is a major part of discipleship. And when that doesn't happen because you just think all it is just trying to get people in the boat, I think we just miss out on so many phenomenal opportunities that are real. There's just tons and tons of opportunities to repair the world every day of our lives. And so once you have that mentality, it becomes a lens to where you're not only like you're looking for areas to do that, and that just becomes a part of your discipleship process of what it is to follow Yeshua.
Cool. Well, do you have any last thoughts or parting words for our listeners? What do you think? What's one more thing you think they might need to hear?
Well, my parting words would be: I want to just express my gratitude to FFOZ. Everything that you guys are doing has been just unbelievably helpful for me personally, and so I'm really, really grateful. I would encourage people to read what has been written by FFOZ, because there's been an enormous amount of work that has been done that is just so beneficial. And it's not to say that, everything's perfect by FFOZ. I know we're all just human beings trying to put these pieces together, but I think the general framework is really, really cool. It's really, really solid. And so if somebody's wondering, is this a worthy thing? There's so much information out there. Why would I give my attention to this? I'm because of the enormity of thought that has been done in trying to lay this out in a comprehensive way, which there's a lot of great books out there. Sometimes I can't even understand those books. They're written in a way that I have to put so much energy to understand what they're trying to say, where I think that FFOZ has tried to make it extremely accessible and tried to make it to where it's you can really take this in. You can really get the big meta narrative of the text. And in that's going to only, the wonder and the, just the beauty that you can see inside of this framework is just so cool. And it's you realize you could study this for the rest of your life. And you're never going to run out of stuff to think through. So I just wanted to give a plug to FFOZ and the material that they're producing or you're producing. I think it's a worthy adventure.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the kind words. We do our best. With God's help, we can make it possible. We can make it possible for people to really, really re-engage the Bible from as Jewish literature, from a Messianic Jewish perspective. Yeah, it's helpful.
Cool.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us here for this conversation. We wish you all the best and many repaired lives over there at Adult and Teen Challenge. And, God bless you and all the work you're doing.
Thank you. Bless you.
Well, thanks for joining us today on First Fruits of Zion's Messiah podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review along with a 5-star rating. If you want to learn more about the Jewish Jesus, create a free account at ffoz.org and start studying the scriptures from a Messianic Jewish perspective. We'll even give you a free book. Messiah Podcast is made possible by the generosity of our First Fruits of Zion friends. FFOZ friends are people like you who partner in our mission to reconcile disciples of Yeshua with God's prophetic promises to Israel. Tune in next time for more great conversations. Until then, I'm Jacob Fronczak. Shalom.
Put your hand in mine together. We will walk in harmony. Let me introduce you to my teacher, the rabbi from the Galilee. Let his word cover you and me like the